Finally, my hot take is ready. Hello everyone, welcome to the third installment in the plugin Teardown series. In this series I'm looking at open source plugins on the Bubble Marketplace to figure out how they work in real time by analyzing the plugin code. If you haven't seen the first two videos, I would highly recommend checking those out. You can find them on our YouTube channel. We'll make sure to put a link somewhere. The plugin that we're looking at this time is called Toast Notifications, and it lets you add these nice, sleek, animated notifications to your app. It's a plugin that has been around for a while and it has received a ton of installs and updates over the years. And it's actually a really great example of a plugin that uses React. Now, you've probably heard of React before. The way they describe themselves is a library for web and native user interfaces, right? It's a very popular JavaScript library and it's very widely adopted. Millions of developers use this worldwide and it has a huge ecosystem, right? It has led to many great open source components that people have built that are now compatible with React. And one of them is this one, React Hold Toast, which happens to be the library that we use in the Toast Notifications plugin. So, as usual, I've got a few browser tabs open. Let's quickly go over them. The first tab that I've opened is the actual demo for this plugin. The second tab that I've opened is the Bubble editor that points to this demo. And the third tab is the Bubble plugin editor that actually holds the code for this plugin. Let's start with the demo so we can quickly get an understanding of what this plugin does. Okay, so we can already see that this is a simple plugin that just adds a notification to your app whenever you want to trigger it. There's a few types of notifications. We can see that there's a success, blank, error, and loader notification. You can customize it by picking the location of the notification. So it defaults to the top right, which is probably where you want to have the notification. And if I click on this button, it's going to show me a success notification. If I click on blank, it's going to show me a blank notification. If I click on error, it's going to give me the error notification. And if I click on the loader notification, it's going to show a different type of notification, which doesn't go away until you manually dismiss it by, for example, clicking this one again, right? So you can see that it turned into a success notification. That way you can have an operation that runs and you can notify at the end whether it worked or it didn't to the user. So it looks like a very simple plugin. Let's check out the editor for this. Now, inside of the Bubble editor for the demo, I already quickly located the buttons that we just used in the demo, and I'm very interested to find out what happens when this button was clicked. So I'm going to click on the button and then click Edit Workflow, and we can see that there's only one action in this workflow, and it's actually an action called Notify, and it's being ran on an element. So this already indicates that this is not a regular action. This is what we call an element action. This means that this action will only exist after you add an element to the page. So without the element on the page, this action won't be callable. It won't be visible at all for you to click on and select. So we're first going to check out what else it has. So we can see that you can pass in a message, which is just a message that's going to show up in the actual notification. And you can select the type, which is going to be one of those four types that we just saw in the demo over here: success, blank, error, and show. Yes, that's the same. And then lastly, you can set the duration of this notification. So you might want this to only show up for 1 second. Then you would put 1000 here because it's in milliseconds. Okay, so we can see that this is being attached to an element called notifier, right? So if I go over here and then use this little drop down and type notifier, we can actually quickly locate the element on the page itself. You can see that the element is over here. It's what we call a non-interactive element. This is an element that you put on the page, but you don't see it. You don't want it to be visible. You just want Bubble to put it on the page so that you can start using it and it can expose some states or it can expose some actions. In this case, we don't want any notification to be visible until we actually trigger it. So that's why this has to be on the page. You can also see that this is where you can set all the configuration that is common between all notifications. So in this case, that's just the colors and the fonts and the location and stuff. Okay, so I think we've seen enough to dive into the plugin editor. We know that this plugin is one element and it exposes one action. So we made it to the plugin editor, and before we dive into the element, because we know this plugin has an element, we're going to do a quick routine check to see if there's anything else we should be paying attention to. So if I click on share, you can see that it's empty, so we can ignore this section. The API call section is also empty, so we can ignore this. And same goes for actions. If we go here, we can see that it's empty, so we can ignore it. And we can put our full focus on the elements tab over here. Okay, we can see that this plugin over here only contains a single element, and the element is called notifier, and it's put under the visual element category. This means that when you go into the editor, so if I just go to the Bubble editor, whenever your plugin is installed, your element will show up over here under the visual elements section. So if I start searching for notifier, you can see that it shows up over here, right? So that also means that a plugin could have multiple elements, but typically it only has one. Okay, now we're just going to go top to bottom. The first thing we see over here are the bubble properties. So these are the things that bubble adds to every single element. And those are the things like, is the element resizable? Is it responsive? Does it have a background? Does it have borders? Does it have padding and box shadow? You as a plugin developer, whenever you use these options, it's going to expose more and more options to the bubble developer for them to use. I'm not going to go into detail. All of this will be covered extensively in the plugin course. For now, I'm just kind of going to go over it and figure out how this plugin works. We can see that the width and the height of this plugin is 24 pixels. This is because this is a non-interactive element. We actually don't want you to see anything. We just want this to be on the page. So we make it a little square that you can just put somewhere in the page that loads the code. This is the interesting part. These are all of the fields that are on the element. So this will match basically what's on the element. So if I click here, all of these fields over here, which is a long list because there's so many different types, you're going to have to set up over here. And you add the documentation, you add what type it is. So if I put in a value, even if it's a dynamic one, like a border size 2, you will be able to see that number in your code. Okay, I'm going to scroll down, and we can see that there's an element action, which is called notify. And this is the action that we triggered in this workflow over here. So if I go to the workflow, we can see that this is the action. It's called notify, and you pass in the element notifier, which makes it an element action because this action is tied to a specific element on the page. Okay, so this is where the code starts. We can see that there's some commented out code, so we can actually ignore this. It's not important. And there's a huge mess over here, right? So we can see that the initialize function is just one big blob of unreadable JavaScript. And this is for a very, very good reason. This is what we call bundled JavaScript, right? There's multiple ways to get to a JavaScript bundle, which is also something I'll probably make a separate video about. But let's just say that in order to use React, you need to do a few things outside of the Bubble plugin editor first, and you need to get this blob of code first, which you're going to put into the Bubble editor, and then you're going to continue using it in the other parts of the plugin editor. So yeah, to do this, you need to kind of like understand how bundling works. We use something called ESBuild to do this, and I'm going to make a separate video extensively explaining how to do this, which is going to be part of the course as well. So we can see that once you have this bundled code, which contains everything like React, React DOM, all the dependencies it creates, or it also contains that library called React Hot Toast, it's going to add a bunch of things that you can then interact with via the code that are on the global window object. So this code is looking a little bit more normal, and this is the code that actually uses the library. So this is essentially just the library, and we don't want to change this code ever. We just want to include it in the plugin. And this is the code that actually uses the library, right? And we can see that all those properties that get passed into the properties over here, there's a bunch of code over here that does stuff like take the font size, what's the font that was selected by the user, and we can get that in the code. And over here, you can see that we're using some code that says react.createElement. Now, this is that stuff that I was just talking about, that this big blob of code exposes a bunch of things that you can then use in the rest of your code. And you can see that we're creating an element called toaster, and we're passing in all of the customization that was set by the user. So we're accessing all of those properties in this code, and we're basically just configuring a notification based on the configuration that the user has set up in the plugin. And then at the very end, we do something called react DOM.render, which puts this React component on the page, and it renders it in the page, right? So this little square that we were just talking about is actually a React component on your page, right? And once that's on your page, we can actually run functions on it, like the notify function, which is a very simple function if you think about it. So the hard part about this plugin is figuring out how to bundle it, but using it is very easy because it's essentially just a little bit of JavaScript to say, show me this kind of notification with these colors and this font. It's very simple, right? So you can see that the actual notify action is only 18 lines of code. There's nothing happening here that's very interesting. So all we do here is check based on those properties which were passed in, like which type of notification did the user select. We're just picking the right type of style to pass along to the library, and then the library actually renders the notification, right? That's why there's this if statement over here. So we're checking, is it a success that the user selected? Is it an error that user selected? Is it a blank option that user selected, or is it the loading one? And then we're calling a different function. You can see that we're calling toast.success when it's a success. parameter that was passed in. And we're doing the same for error, same for blank, same for loading. So in a nutshell, this plugin isn't actually that complicated to actually use as a developer even, or someone that writes code. The only hard part is how do you get to this bundle JavaScript part, which is a step that you have to do before you're even in this editor. So it's kind of like separate from this all, but that process is going to be the same for any kind of React component that you want to render in Bubble. So stay tuned because we're going to make a video about that. Okay, just to summarize the most important takeaways from this video from top to bottom. So the fields section is where you as the Bubble plugin developer decide which fields and what kind of data your plugin accepts. As the Bubble developer, it will show up like this and you'll be able to provide the values either statically or dynamically, and you'll be able to get those values in the code to, for example, update the UI of your element. Okay, so now we're going to scroll down. We're going to look one more time at the initialize function. So in this case, the initialize function contains a big blob of bundle JavaScript. But all you need to know for now is that this bundle contains React, React DOM, and it also contains the library that we're using, which is in this case React Hot Toast. All of that is encapsulated within this JavaScript over here, and that's why it's such a big blob of JavaScript. Then there's the update function. This function gets called anytime a value of any of the fields that we've set up changed. So if I change this color from green to slightly darker green, this function will run again. And all this code does is it's basically going to pick up this configuration that we've set in the plugin, and it's going to set the base default styling of all of the different types of notifications. And then lastly, there's the notify action, which is the element action that we've seen in the demo that we've called. So if we go there one more time, we can see that this is the action which runs this code. And all it does is it takes in the type, message, with these things. This is the type and this is the message. And it uses that to decide what style of notification to actually render when we trigger it. Alright everybody, that is going to be it for this video. I'm trying to keep them fairly short, so please comment below with any questions or thoughts so I can answer them. Also, leave a comment with the next plugin you think we should review. Thanks for watching, and until next time, cheers.